Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, does he agree with JP Morgan Investment Bank that, quote, the recovery in New Zealand effectively has stalled, close quote?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no, I don't agree with that assessment because it's incorrect. Now, some people, of course, thrive on a negative headline, including perhaps some not too far from where I'm standing, but the facts are the economy has grown for 5 consecutive quarters after 5...
Point of order, the Honourable Darren Hughes.
Speaker, I'm not sure who the Minister was referring to, but clearly he was trying to insult somebody in the answer to a primary question that the Minister was given, that the member, my colleague, asked. I think the people of Rodney have had very dignified representation for many years, and if he's the alternative, I'm quite worried.
Order. The member went one step too far with that. But a point of order is being considered, and members on both sides will be silent while that's the matter. In fairness to the Minister, I think he's been away from the House while there has been some ruling from the Speaker on not employing gratuitous comments when a question is a straight question. This question is a straight question. Does he agree with JP Morgan Investment Bank? The Minister answered that. I think he said it didn't, and that is a sufficient answer for the question. The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, what response does he have to TV3 Duncan Garner's comments that, quote, National's economic plan, if there is one, doesn't appear to be working, close quote?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, acknowledging, of course, Duncan's role as a preeminent economist in New Zealand, I would just have to respectfully disagree with His Eminence because the government has a very comprehensive plan, as the member is aware, including investment of infrastructure, the taxation package, the investment in education and skills, in business innovation and trade, improving productivity in the public sector, and simplifying and improving regulations to ensure that businesses can succeed in this country. In fact, there's one example that the House has an opportunity to consider this afternoon to ensure that takes place in New Zealand in regards to the Hobbit movies.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, in light of that answer, which of the following further summary from Duncan Garner does he disagree with, if any? Quote, Alan Bollard says the economy is fragile. English can't rule out the cash deficit blowing out even further. He says recessionary factors are still in play. There are no signs of new jobs. National's economic plan seems to be cross its collective fingers and, dare I say it, borrow and hope. Close quote.
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, like I say before, Mr. Speaker, I do of course respect the eminent Professor Garner's economic assessments. But can I say that, of course, the world has just come through the global financial crisis. It's important to point out to the member opposite that the government's fiscal deficit this current year is something like $13.3 billion. And so the government is basically, on behalf of taxpayers, investing to keep the economy going to the degree that it is doing. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that if the member thinks that we should do more, then he's actually talking about lifting the government debt even further, and I think he should come out and say that.
John Hayes.
Speaker, what measures is the government taking to ensure the economic recovery is sustainable, and how will this differ from the period between 2005 and 2008?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the government is taking several steps with its six-point plan to achieve faster and more sustainable economic growth. One such measure was the very well-received tax package on the 1st of October, which provided across-the-board income tax cuts and left the vast majority of New Zealanders better off. The switch between income tax and consumption tax is the latest step in the government's program to move the economy away from the borrowing, consumption and housing speculation of the past decade. I'm pleased to see reports showing that households and businesses are moving away from that spending and borrowing, which became features of our lopsided economy from around 2005.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
To the Minister, how does he respond to the Reserve Bank's comments that show the only glimmer of any economic activity over the coming year is in the form of high export prices and repairs in Canterbury, neither of which the government can claim credit for?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I think selective quoting has its limitations. I would suggest a couple of other things. that Dr. Bollard has said in the recent Reserve Bank annual report, where he points out the global financial crisis highlighted New Zealand's external imbalances, demonstrated by our deficits in the balance of payments on goods and services and our negative net investment income position. These deficits are now improving. So, for example, the current account deficit averaged about 8% of GDP over the last 4 years of the previous government. The current account deficit is now just 3% and is forecast to remain below 5%. Dr. Bollard also noted that households have been reducing mortgage debt where possible and have been cautious about re-entering the housing market, attitudes that have been reinforced positively by recent tax changes. All these things and other things the Reserve Bank Governor has said has pointed out that the rebalancing that this economy so much needs is occurring.
John Hayes.
Mr Speaker, to the Minister of Finance, what reports has he seen about business attitudes to the recovery?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I noted yesterday that the National Bank's latest Business Outlook survey showed that business confidence has picked up in October. A net 24% of respondents expect general business conditions to improve in 12 months' time, up 10 points on the previous month. These surveys, of course, continue to fluctuate, and as I've said, the economic conditions remain challenging for many businesses as the economy makes the necessary adjustments away from debt, consumption and housing speculation and towards saving, investments and exports.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Speaker, to the Minister, when he told the Finance and Expenditure Committee yesterday, and I quote, "This is not the typical recession where we come out of it aggressively," did he deliberately choose his words to directly contradict and undermine his leader, who had predicted exactly the opposite?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, while I of course cannot verify the exact comments the Minister of Finance made at the committee yesterday, I would point out to the member that the PM's full quote from March 2009 is that by the end of 2009, early 2010, this time next year, we'll be starting to come out of that, and I think actually starting to come out of it reasonably aggressively. I'm more optimistic about 2011 than 2010, but nevertheless I think 2010 will be positive. The reality is that those statements were proven entirely correct. We started to come out of recession by the end of 2009. 2010 will be positive. 2011 will see a considerable improvement, and in terms of aggressive growth, the House should note that the New Zealand economy has actually grown more in the last 9 months than it did in the whole 4-year period before that.
Question number 4, Colin King.
Thank